Hello, everyone. So glad that you're able to join us today. And we are here to talk all about challenges and strategies with CBE and what does that look like. My name is Dr. Rhonda Blackburn. I'm going to actually share, well, not going to, but I'm Dr. Rhonda Blackburn. I am the Senior Director of Academic Services and Client Success. If I could remember my title, would be great. And I am here with Ashley Nelson. So, Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dr. Ashley Nielsen. I actually chair the Individualized Masters of Arts program at Antioch University, but I've also been involved in the competency-based education for over 10 years at this point, working on different instructional design projects.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's so great to see everyone. Lots of wonderful people here. And definitely, as we go through the session today, get into the chat. Would love to hear from you. If you have any questions, we may actually throw some questions out to you. But one of the things that we would love to hear from you at the beginning is, you know, why are you here? What are you looking for when it comes to this topic of challenges and strategies? Are you already doing CBE? Are you thinking about it? Um, so would love to hear some, y'all throw some stuff into that chat to let us know who you are and where you're coming from. But as we do that, we're going to go ahead and start the topic of, you know, before we kind of get into those challenges and those strategies, it's really what is the essence of CBE, competency-based education? What is it that um, when you're putting together a CBE program, I know Ashley and I have done a lot of work with people to help them kind of think through. And I think that's one of the biggest things. Actually, you probably can agree with me, is one of the biggest things before you can get started is what is it that you want to do? What does that look like? Um, and how do you create program? A lot of people will um, kind of look at what they already have on campus, especially online programs that they already have, and try to figure out how can you take that and move it over to CBE. Um, is it um, you know, having to take the entire program and kind of re-envision it? Is it just thinking about how to make it more self-paced? Is it all of these things? And I don't know, Ashley, when I know when you start working with people, what is the first thing that comes to mind that you want to talk to people about, or what's kind of that first strategy that you work with?
The first strategy I work with is I talk with them about so we can have a shared understanding of what competency-based education is, because I think there's a really wide range of understanding. And so I think it's really important to both come to the same place and be like, okay, this is what I'm really interested in. There's many pieces that people take of competency-based education, which is great, but sometimes it's not the whole package. And so we need to be really clear on what we both mean by competency-based education.
And I actually love that because there are a lot of different definitions, different concepts out there of how to put CBE together. Could be everywhere from, are you wanting to do a extended ed program that's a certificate program and be able to look at what competencies there are, all the way to a full academic program. I mean, there's so many ways in between to kind of build that up, um, and to really think about what that means. And I think we probably could all agree when it comes to CBE is that it should include competencies. And one of the areas that I love is to be able to go out and look at what skills and competencies are needed in a workplace. What does that look like? and what workplaces around you that you can then funnel people from your institution into those workplaces. Um, and to be able to kind of think through what does that look like for them and also, for your institution. Um, I know a lot of people have been talking about kind of those stackable credentials. How can you maybe get a certificate in this one area? And if you build on top of that with another certificate, how does that look like for an actual program, an academic degree program? Because I think that a lot of people are kind of thinking through that as well. I don't know, Ashley, if you've run into that when you are talking with people out in the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Once we kind of establish what competency based is and what they're looking for, I that's the next question that I ask because I go, where are these students moving into in terms of career, and what are those jobs, and what competencies do they really need to have in order to get those jobs, and then we kind of go backwards from there. And so I'm seeing in the chat that there's a lot of BNS and nursing. And so exactly. So we would then go to, at that level of, entering nursing at with a BS, what are the competencies that are needed? And then we kind of go backwards from there.
Yeah, and I definitely love that backwards design, right? Obviously, starting with those competencies, you have to have those competencies to have that system together. But then I think really that next step is, um, once you have those competencies, how do you know someone actually has those competencies once they've gone through your program, right? Um, and I I believe that one of the biggest pieces, besides those competencies, one of the biggest pieces of CPE are the assessments that you use, and it's such a critical piece. Because if you can show that someone through that assessment or several assessments, that someone has those skills or competencies, then it is definitely more meaningful, especially for the employers that are out there looking for those people. And if you work with those employers, your assessments could be even more authentic. Um, and yeah, I know, Ashley, you've done a lot of this, right? You've kind of worked with people a lot trying to look at what does it mean to, um, determine if someone has those skills. So, what are some of the strategies that you use when working with people on that piece?
I think that one of the let's see. In terms of academia, a lot of times we focus on the knowledge bits, but not the application. And so a lot of times, since we're talking about challenges in this and strategies, I really talk about, okay, so yes, they might need to know that content, but what's really important in terms of competency is that they're able to apply it. So where is the situation in, that they might run into where they'll be applying everything that they've been learning? So if it's, instead of knowing the philosophy of a business plan, like let's write a business plan, right? Or in terms of, nursing, in terms of understanding, that, someone has a high blood pressure and what to do about it, right? And knowing all the theoretical, it's okay, here's a scenario that is being presented to you. Now, what would you do as a nurse? So it's that whole application piece that's really important. And we really try to make it real. I know that word's horrible, but real world application. It's not just in like the academia towers. It's like what will they actually be doing in that job? So that's where we go out and we talk to people that are doing those jobs. And what are the skills that you really need? What is your daily activities? What do you run into? And then we build assessments according to that.
Yeah, and, yes, real world, those 2 terms, right? But I really also like when students can, build a plan of whatever it is. But I love to go on the back end and say, "Okay, why did you build this plan the way you did? How did you
Mhm.
build it? What are some of the things that you're looking at to build that plan. So not only are you giving them that real world understanding of, okay, when you get in the real world, you're going to have to build this, you're going to have to do this. But I also want to understand what was your thinking process behind it.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
kind of having those two pieces. And, one of the things that come up all the time when I talk to people is, well, what about those soft skills? What about how do you know someone understands communication or can think critically about something? And I really think by getting into some of that back end part of it, really understanding how did you build this? Why did you build this? What are the things you went out to find to build this? So you're looking at those different strategies that they're going to do. I don't know. You're nodding your head, so I think we're probably both in agreement there. But what are the other things that you can think of that you could do to kind of bring in some of those soft skills?
Um, I mean, you said it well. I really like reflection as well. I mean, you kind of touched on that. So it's reflecting on, why they did it, same sort of thing, just a different way of going into it. And then in terms of CBE, what I like about it is there is that final assessment, but then there's also all these formative assessments that come up to that. And so I feel like, you're not just testing at the one end and seeing if they have it. You're really helping them build and scaffold up to that final assessment. And so instead of having all of those soft skills, assessed just in that final assessment, you can, periodically check in with them and seeing how they're developing through the whole entire course. If
Yes,
that makes
I'm
sense.
so glad you brought up formative assessments because I do think that is probably the next step, right? When you're building this out, it's not only how are you going to really assess those competencies, but how are you going to guide them through that? So that curriculum piece on building it. And, you know, I think that not only is it making sure they're reading the right things or you're giving them things, even simulations to do. But I love to have my students go out and actually find those resources, right? Find the ways to so you're creating kind of that lifelong learner kind of thing, being able to help them understand, okay, when you get into the job market, I'm not going to you're not going to be given the curriculum, right? You're going to have to find ways to do that. And so by though taking those formative assessments and it could be as simple as quick quiz to make sure they know that knowledge, right? Because knowledge is still really important no matter what. So can you take those real quick quizzes, or is it something that is a discussion between you as the instructor and the student? Can you give them, I don't want to say an assignment, but like a task or a reflection, or there's so many different ways. Maybe it's putting an outline together before they have to put together that project plan, right? Um, to help guide them through that process. But I also know that one of the pieces of developing curriculum is making it relevant. Um, Obviously, we try to do that no matter what. When we put a course together, we want all the stuff to be relevant. But many times that relevancy is to the topic more than to what they're going to be doing, that applied piece. But I think, and I've seen some of the stuff you do. I think that you help bring those 2 pieces together, right? Really helping. So how do you guide the subject matter expert or even the school as they're thinking about putting this together to make sure that they are going out finding the right curriculum to be able to do this?
I mean, I think that's where you really have to have people in the field as well, and not just a subject matter expert, like really pick that person in a way in which they know how to do that bridge between the two, because it's a definite skill
Mhm.
that some people have, where they're really able to take the real situations and then bring it into the curriculum and make it relevant. You know, I'm looking, a lot of these people are in the medical field, and that has changed so much, in the last, what, 6 months even. And I think that even in there, people have been talking about how when they go to the doctor now, they're Googling things automatically, because things change so much. And so, like you're saying, like, how do you get that information? How do you get those critical thinking skills and those critical research skills? You know, and those are the situations that students really need to know how to do.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, just to your point again, where it's really stressing those soft skills, where you do have that lifelong learning capacity, which I don't think is necessarily developed in a lot of curriculum. So yeah, so I spend a lot of time working on developing those skills and working on really having that open communication with understanding how the field is changing and how, what situations might be coming up. And then, as we were saying, design backwards. And also understanding, talking with them about the scaffolding, because CBE is a lot about scaffolding as well. And so, as a designer, I don't know every single situation or every single subject. And so, that's where you really have that relationship where you're like, okay, so, when you first start, what was the hardest thing that you didn't know, right? And what was the hardest thing that you wish you had spent more time on? And what are the ones that you're really happy that you did know? Right. And so just having those conversations with them to really understand their process of learning and what they felt was not, you know, they could have spent more time on, or they wish they'd spent more time on, and vice versa. So it's a lot of conversations to really make sure that it gels well.
So you brought up a couple of things that in my head, I'm like, "Oh, let's talk about this more." You mentioned the word scaffolding, and I do love that idea of taking one thing and making sure students know it and can apply it before and then start adding things on, but you kind of overlap as you're doing it, right? So that scaffolding is you're pulling them up to understand those higher level thoughts or even the content is more detailed. But it's allowing them to really understand what something is, and then that little piece on top of it, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more until you get them where you need them to go. And what I love about that as a faculty member is I get to help guide them through that, right? I get to really help them understand where they like you were saying, I know this part really well, or I struggled with this. How do we get our students to create that awareness of where they are, in that process? And I really think that both the scaffolding piece and that interaction between the instructor and the student become critical in that. Um, do you have any examples of where you have worked with someone that has maybe at first was like, "Oh, I don't know about this," and then they were like, "Okay, and this is how we're gonna do that."
Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of a good one. I think also just stepping back in terms of scaffolding. I'm a psychologist, and so with scaffolding, it really helps the student have more confidence as well. Because, like with anything, you really, a strategy is you start easy and then you get harder as you move on. And so, really designing the scaffolding where it's like, okay, this, right? And then they feel good about it. But you don't want to give them too much, this, because then they'll be bored and they don't want to continue the class. But you just start enough with, okay, this, so they feel confident in themselves to then continue. And then you just incrementally make it a little bit harder until you reach your goal. So I think that scaffolding is a really great way, and it's really easy to do in CBE, and it's kind of an essential principle of it. In
Yeah.
terms of that, an example, oh my goodness, there's too many to think of. Help me narrow it down here. Um, uh,
So I know that at one point you were actually working with, um, a fire program.
Yep.
I can't even remember what it is. And it was perfect for CBE, right?
Mhm.
But there were some challenges with that as well, that you got to kind of help walk them through.
Yeah. So with that example, it was really interesting because this is a classic example of they knew their topic almost too well. And so they didn't necessarily understand the scaffolding aspect of it. And so we were just able to really unpack the different knowledge bits that needed and then the different skills and how to go back and forth between the two of them in a way that really built it to the goal. So, they might have been like, well, they need to do this skill first. And you're like, well, let's take a step back and realize that there's actually some content that needs to be done before they get to that skill. And then this skill probably needs to be before that skill. Is that what you mean in terms of an example?
Yes, definitely.
Um, and so, yeah, so it was really interesting where, obviously there's a lot in terms of fire science. And so there are some skills that being in the field, you might forget that you even had. And so it's really taking it back to the beginning and really understanding your students and where they're coming from. And that's a big aspect as well in terms of the design, is not only understanding where they're going, but where they actually are. And then designing from that.
And
Because
the
not
nice
everyone,
thing about
go ahead.
Yeah, and the nice thing about CBE is that if you start too easy for certain people, they can go through that pretty quickly, right? They're like, "Oh, I know this piece. I'm gonna go through it." Then they hit a part that becomes challenging because they may have already been in the field a little bit to understand that piece. Um, and that's the beauty of CBE is that it is self-paced, so you're able to get students through pieces that they already know and they're confident with to get them to a point where, okay, this is a piece that, or it may be a piece that they never thought about before, even though they've been in the field a long time. It's like, oh, wait a second, I I've done this, but I never knew maybe the steps or exactly the best way to do it. And so being able to help them also kind of break those down. So it's funny you mentioned psychology. So a long time ago, I was a psychologist as well, and we did a lot of behavior modification, and that's part of it too. It's like breaking down those so you have your competencies, but then breaking those competencies down into smaller bite steps or skills or whatever you want to call it to be able to get to that competency, right? And be able to understand what that looks like. And so one of the other things you talked about was kind of this difference really between a subject matter expert and the faculty or a designer, or I mean there's a lot of different pieces when it comes to CBE where there may be quite a few people working together. So you have your faculty member that knows the topic really well, but now you also have someone that is using that in the field and can help them kind of bridge that gap to what are those competencies. Then you have a designer that understands the flow of designing and what that should look like and working together and having that communication. Um, and I realize not every institution or school has the ability to have all of those types of people. But if you have the opportunity to have each one of those, I mean, having someone from the industry, if especially if your institution has you don't even have to have agreement, but that knowing that we want to funnel our students to that company or something, them being able to provide someone to help with that translation from this is academic world and this is this is what they will be doing with that. Um,
Yeah, I mean, and a great example of that is we were doing one for grocery store management, and so we had a lot of subject matter experts in terms of management, but we didn't have anyone that was actually applying it to the grocery store field. And so, we went out and we talked to, grocery managers to really understand how management was being applied in that situation. And so we really made it relevant because of that. And if we didn't have that connection, then it would just been any type of management course, and it wouldn't necessarily apply to what was really wanting to be taught and learned.
Yeah, definitely. No, I love that because it not only does it bring the subject matter to life, right? It allows the students to really kind of see, okay, this is where I'm going. This is what I'm wanting to do, or maybe I'm already in the grocery store, but I'm doing something else, right? I want to move up to management and being able to really see how that fits into their uh, what they need to be doing. The nice thing about doing something like that is you could also have this core piece of management curriculum that if you then start working with, say, car dealerships and you need management within car dealerships, you can still take a piece of that content and move over and utilize that understanding of how does that now apply to car dealerships instead of grocery stores. Some similarities, but definitely some differences there. So I think being able to have the understanding of what is the core and how is that applied becomes really critical when you're building out those different programs.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think one thing to stress was when they start, for example, like with the grocery manager, on day one, I want them to already have done a lot of what they were going to do as a manager. So it's not they start the job and then have to learn everything. It's they've already done it, right? They've already been doing that competency because that was the CBE program. So it's not like day one, now they're going to have to learn all sorts of new stuff. They're going to have pieces that they've already done because of the assessments, because the assessments will have had those tasks or projects already incorporated in it.
Definitely. So one of the things that I think is also difficult for people to do is thinking about the rubrics when it comes to grading these particular projects, right? To make sure that, I mean, we kind of going back to, okay, that assessment needs to be 100% aligned to what those competencies are and what you're really truly expecting them to do. And so when you're building that rubric out, what does that look like? How is that different than just a regular rubric in an online course?
These are good questions. I think in terms of academia versus traditional academia versus competency based, the rubrics are very different, and I think that is a point that's sometimes hard to understand those differences. And I think that also, before I forget, in terms of the competencies and the rubrics, uh, anyone that is actually grading should have the same understanding of the rubric. And I think that's really important in terms of CB, especially. So when you build a rubric, it's almost like you kind of need to train the graders in a way to understand how to actually use the rubric. So then there's inter-rater reliability. So if a student comes in, all three graders will have graded it the same exact way. And so in that way, the art of rubric making is real, and it does need to take a lot of time. And I think usually people don't spend as much time on rubrics, but in CBE, it's really important for many reasons. But with the rubric, say for example, which I love about CBE is you can connect them to all sorts of different things. So like say for example, in Strut, what's really nice is you can literally have the rubric and then each one be tied to a certain content area or a certain formative assessment or something like that. So then if they don't, get however the grading might be 0 to 5, if they don't get the 5, then they know exactly where they need to go to review and to integrate that skill in a different way. So then they could come back to that assessment, and be successful. So it's that's not necessarily true in traditional rubrics, but this one is, you can very much tie it to every single content piece that you have, and vice versa. So all of the content should be right in the rubric in a sense, or why did you go over it? And then, and it also should be directly to the competency and to the, set competencies that you created.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, when you're thinking about that, it's not only is what they're doing in that assessment relevant and going toward that competency, but now in the rubric, you're actually listing that competency or sub-competencies within it to really be able to make sure that they've hit every single thing that you're expecting them to. And, you know, the other thing that I also absolutely love about CBE is the idea that failure is a learning experience. And it should be everywhere in education, right? But especially in CBE, because you should be able to go in, you think you're ready, you're working through something, you put something together, you submit it, and maybe you totally missed a specific competency or a specific piece of it, right? And getting that feedback from your instructor to say, these are the things that you need to work on. This is what you need to do. This is, I don't see this piece. And also being able to have that communication with the instructor is the ability for a student to then go back, relook at what they've done, and redo it. So that way they are actually building, continue to build those competencies to to we say pass, but to actually master those competencies, right? Within the course that you have them in. So um,
And that's a soft skill that you, through the design of CBE, are actually developing, right? It's that growth mindset. It's the not yet. I didn't fail. It's just not yet. And that is one of the most important skills in life. So CBE is just naturally does that through the feedback and having that sense of control in the student to really be like, oh, okay, it's not like throwing it over the fence and then getting an F. It's like, okay, this is like a process in which I can always improve
mm,
until I master the competency, which
yeah,
really
and
gives
I
that competency.
and I agree. I think that that concept is a challenge both for instructors and students, right? I mean, it's a different way of thinking about it. And so being able for an instructor to get out of the mindset, "Oh, I am babying them their way all the way through this," or "I'm hand-holding them through." No, you are guiding them through the process of understanding and learning and creating and developing that competency. And the student is doing the work to make sure that they are building that competency to be able to then turn around and show you, yes, see, I learned from what you told me. I understand now. And here is that evidence that I do know it now. And I think that's a shift for some faculty, but I also think it's a shift for students too, because there's many students that throughout their academic career, they're like, oh, an exam's coming up. I'm going to cram for this. I'm going to take it. Whatever I make, and I'm going to go on. No, you have to continue to work on it and build those skills and become, you know, that lifelong learner, that person that is going to continue to build and make that and build, and create that competency within themselves. Um,
A great example, speaking of the fire people, was when they don a suit, they have to make sure it's sealed. And so there was a rubric, and it was really interesting because one of them was that. And, traditionally, if you get an 80%, then you pass, right? But in CBE, it's like, no, like you can't move on if you don't know how to seal your suit, which is obviously makes sense or they'll die, right? This is like life or death if you don't know how to seal your suit correctly. So I think that's like a really good example in terms of how CBE and rubrics can be really different. So you don't really want to have, oh, I kind of know 80% of something. Um, Oh, I'm gonna read it too. You really want them to know every single competency, if that makes sense. Okay, now I'll read the thing.
I know. I was like, "Oh, what did Luke say?" Because and I agree, so we can definitely go and take a deeper dive into rubrics at a later, webinar because I do think that that rubric development is incredibly important for CBE.
Yeah, really saying it.
You're welcome, Luke. And so, what's interesting is that, you bring up technology. And I do think that in whatever type of program you're doing, having the right technology. I mean, we've said for years and years and years, don't use technology for the sake of using technology. Use it because it is what you need to do whatever it is that you want the students to do. And so being able to have a program that or a technology that will allow you to do CBE, I think is really important in this. Now, of course, this is a Strut webinar, so as you see, we don't talk about Strut very often, but I have to boast that it is an LMS that is only built for CBE. We don't try to do something different. We try to make sure that we create an environment that is specifically for CBE. So one of the things that Ashley said earlier was being able to connect content or your assessment piece to content to know what you need to go back and look at if you're not doing well on something or you missed it or you're struggling with that little piece, it will tell you where you can go and do that. Um, so
And
I
it's
don't know.
really easy. I'm just saying, I've been on a bunch of different LMSs and then, Strut for CBE. It makes it so easy. And it's also just part of it. You don't have to go find it. It automatically will be like, where do you want it to connect to? So it's like just really streamlined in there versus like having to go find how to connect it, if that makes sense. I don't know if anyone is also a designer here, but that mind numbing, I I I feel for you. It can be really mind numbing. And then of course it doesn't even work because one little thing will be off and then the whole rubric is destroyed basically.
Yeah.
But in the Strut platform, it's hard to mess up. I'll put it that
Yeah.
way.
Well, and then I won't continue very much after this, but I do want to also, talk about the development of a program, right? How do you build out your program? One of the things is, do you do it by a course or do you do it actually by a competency? And one of the things that Strut does is that our shells are called competencies on purpose because you build out what that competency is. And the nice thing about this, once you have a competency, you might be able to use this for management and for a leadership program, right? Or for something else. And so being able to reutilize those competencies. And the nice thing is that you know, if it's what you want, as when someone has completed that competency, they've completed it, and even if it's in another program they're doing, if that's the way you want it to be, unless you want them to redo it because it's important for them to continue to keep that in back of their mind. But understanding what that looks like as a program. So one of the things that Strut has done is actually built out where you can take every single competency that in their own individual shell and put it together in something that we call a product, but you can call it anything, program, pathway, whatever, and allow students, you enroll them into the pathway and they get access to everything in the order that you want them to and how you want them to. So things like that, I think is when it comes to the technology piece is so important on how are they going to flow from one thing to another? How
Mhm.
does that look and how do they get access to it? Um, and sometimes you may have to kind of work within the environment of semesters or terms because of accreditation, which is fine as well. You can do a subscription amount, so there's different ways that you can do it when it comes to how to enroll students and make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to do. But um, on the technology side, we can make it really easy for you to do that. So,
But I think
um,
that also goes to the whole program versus courses. And I think I know you said it, but I just want to reiterate that is such a huge difference. And that's where like that first conversation is really important to understand what they want from CBE. Because ideally, you're really working on a whole program. So then you can break it up into competencies versus courses. And then that way, it can, as you said, you go through different ones. But also, if you have a bunch of different programs, management, nursing, things like that. And you go through, in terms of designing, and you really break down the different competencies that are needed in order to get there. There are going to be ones that are common, right?
Mhm.
And so then, you don't have to build it for both. You just build it, right? You build one. And then in that, you can have, for example, a nursing example, and you can have a choice for, management or something like that. So you don't have just one assessment. Maybe you have two, depending on which pathway the student's going. But it's not that you have to rebuild everything, right? You already have it, and then you can just tweak it according to what the situation is, which, especially in Strut, it's super easy to do, because you can just substitute things in, or you can offer more options, which is really nice.
Yeah, I love that. So one of the things I think one of the other challenges, is students. So not all students do really well with self-paced. Um, and because if you're not intrinsically motivated to get through something, and you're very used to, I have this semester, I have these deadlines, I have to do this, and then all of a sudden you're put into an environment that it is self-paced. You do it at your speed. Now, you may have a deadline maybe at the end of a term that if you need them to have it done by then, but that may be 12 weeks. How do you get them to pace themselves out? So, um, you know, definitely one thing that comes to my mind is the idea of those checks, those milestone checks, or that conversation between the student and the faculty. So that way they can kind of help guide them through that. But what if they aren't getting into that? So there's no conversation. How do we get students to continue to move forward? What does that look like? Any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think some people use coaches as well. So I wanted to just kind of nod my head to that one. So there are people who will understand the pacing that is recommended for the course, and then a coach can come in and help, send the reminders and things like that in terms of that. But in terms of a design, right? There's a lot of gamification principles that you can bring in to really help students kind of understand the whole, and really help them understand what their goal is again, all these different techniques that you can use to really help them motivate to keep moving. But, research says, just reaching out to someone who hasn't been on the platform, right, for a little bit of time, is a huge bonus in terms of getting them to come back in, and then in Strut, which is nice, is you can see exactly where the students are. So say, for example, they're on one piece of content bit and they've been there for 5 days, right? That might be a really good place to come in and say, how can I help you with this content, or something to that nature? So you can really, it's a little big brother, but you can really see where they are and where they're having problems or issues, or dropping out, or if they're, really successful and living all the way through. So in the moment, you can reach out and you can talk to them about that, right? Which anytime there's a personalized experience, it's always good for motivation. And then also on the flip end, once you're done, you can always revise the course as well. So you look at that data, which is why I totally geek out at Strut, because you have so much data to really refine that class to make it even better the next time. So you can literally say, oh, okay, there was like 10 students that were looking at this one, little content piece for a really long time. Maybe we need to redo that. Or, oh, this formative assessment, right? They seem to have trouble with that. So then you can like redo the formative assessment, and you can redo the content to help them build up to that formative assessment. So there's a lot that you can grab from the data in terms of CBE that you can't in pretty much any other situation, to really understand how to, one, support your students better, and also how to redesign and make it even better. So that early intervention piece is really important, but also that revision is as well.
Yeah, no, I like that. Because I know that one of the things, Strata, is we have where we could just send automated emails to students. 7 days, they're going to get an email if they haven't been in the system. You know, so it's going outside the system. It's just not just a notification inside the system, right? We are sending it out to them. But just because they get an email that says you need to get back in the system doesn't mean they are, right? So being able to see what those notifications are for, say, something like someone like a coach, to be able to go, okay, all of these four students haven't been in a system in a week. Let's get a hold of them, if they don't get a hold of them before that, but at least at a certain point, and of course that is determined by the institution. So they may say, actually, every 3 days, if they're not, they need to get an email, right? And so being able to get those indicators, risk indicators out there to make sure the students are moving forward. So I really like that. And, having specific people like coaches or whatever, support success people, whatever you want to call them, to be able to get in there and see what the student is doing if they look like they're stuck on something, because then you can go and look and see what they're stuck on. It's like, okay, this is a really hard piece. This is a difficult, maybe there was too much, like you said, maybe there was too much of a jump between one piece to another piece, and the students are kind of struggling right there. What can we do to fill that in? So, um, definitely,
And
definitely.
yeah, and an example of that might be, something is like math, right? So all of a sudden they come on this math, and as we all know, a lot of people have a lot of math um,
Anxiety.
fear. And so a lot of times, in certain situations, even in the fire, where like a math problem came on, and then you could almost see the panic that happens, right? Because they just freeze in the class and they don't move forward. And so that's where it's like, oh, if you need more help with math, maybe we should go here, or maybe you should use this, maybe you should enroll in this competency or something like that. So then it helps them keep moving forward. Oh, good seeing you, Holly. Thank you.
Thanks, Holly.
Um, but yeah, so I think that's what's really nice about CBE is because you can see exactly where people are. And then you can, if you're familiar with the course and familiar with the content, you can really be like, oh, okay, this actually needs to come in. Here's some more resources perhaps, or something to that nature.
Yeah. And I really also like that idea of maybe it's not when you're talking about gamification, but different approaches you can take within the course to keep
Mhm.
someone excited. I mean, they may be going through a program and there's one particular topic that they're like, I don't really care about this topic, but I know I need to do it, right? We all have done that. And so, how can you put things in there to excite people about it? Maybe it's examples, maybe it's a video, maybe it's a simulation, maybe it's doing some kind of a gamification kind of thing in there to help get people um, more interested in what's going on and to get them through it. So I really like that piece. And if anyone was on our webinar last month, we had a whole webinar on gamification. If you haven't, you need to go and check it out. So, um, but I like that idea that students aren't always motivated to do something. How can we kind of help guide them and push them along to get them there? Um, and I know another piece is always, and this is any online content, is making sure it's accessible. So that could be for students with disabilities, but it could also be students that may not have the best computers, right? They have a 10-year-old computer, well, maybe not that old, maybe a 5-year-old computer that that just doesn't get on the internet really well. So what are you doing? And this, again, I think is not just CBE focused. I think it's just online course focused, to where, you're yeah, obviously have to follow ADA for all your courses to make sure that they're accessible, but also just, and I liked what you said actually at the beginning, is know your audience. Who is coming into your program? Are these people that are young and are always on their computer? Maybe they're on mobile more they are on a computer. Or maybe it's someone that hasn't been in the classroom for 30 years because they want to come back and do a fire course or something, So, you know, what is your audience? Who is your audience? And what are the things that you need to think about that way? I think is
And I
really
think to
important.
that point, because it's self-paced, because it's online type of things in terms of CBE, it's really helpful for a lot of students that might have neurodiversity
Mm,
or
yeah.
neurodiverse. And so, CBE is just a natural pathway for them because it is self-paced and there are the resources that are available. And then in terms of, as a designer, you really think about, how to make each element, right, work. if that makes sense. Obviously, you can't make everything work for everyone, but I do think in terms of that accessibility, CBE is really nice because you're able to do that because there's a lot of planning that's involved. Where in a regular classroom, you just don't have the time. You don't have the time, you don't have the resources, and you don't have the technology to be able to support in the way in which you might need to be supported. So I think
Definitely.
CBE is really great for that.
Definitely. No, I definitely. So one of the things that I know we're coming close to the end of our hour, which I hate because I'm having so much fun having this conversation. Um, but I know one of the biggest challenges that institutions has is that CBE momentum. How do you sustain that and keep it going? Because I can't tell you how many people I know that have started to put together CBE, or maybe they got a grant to do something. And once that grant's done, how do you keep that momentum going? How do you make sure that not only are your administrators on board and your faculty are on board and your students are on board, because that's a huge piece of it, right? Um, but how would, you know, what would be some of your thoughts and strategies behind keeping that momentum going?
For me, I mean, I think you're right. All the stakeholders really need to be understanding the value. But like anything, if you're trying to get a student to get through a course, you need to remind them of that value. You need to remind them of that goal. And so, in terms of the student, that's where you put in, that exciting element of the job that they're going for, right? Which would make them excited to keep going to get to that job. So it's the same sort of thing, if you're doing it as an institution where it's like maybe ask some of the students that have gone through to reflect on their experience and just talk about how valuable it was for having CBE versus the other one. A lot of students will just say, I could have never made it if it was in a regular classroom. I could have never, actually been successful in this. This really helped me have more agency. I feel more, in control of my own education, whatever the reflections are, but they're so powerful and they're really amazing because through the CBA process, they've changed not only, they know more, but they've also changed as a learner as a person. And so, really helping bring those things out to share with the administration, to share with the teachers, right? To really keep that motivation going. Um, Sorry, I'm
Sorry,
getting to too.
sorry, I'm like typing. That's
Okay. Um, yeah, other ones is, another one is highlighting alumni, right? That have actually gotten the jobs because they now have the competencies for that and really having them come in, and talk about that. And, you can even do that as part of the design of a course, right? When you've had it gone long enough, right? A student can come in and do like a little video of like, day 7 on the job, right? And then they talk about like how this course really helped them get through, navigate some sort of project that they had or something like that. Um, yeah. Do you want more examples?
yeah,
I know we're
definitely. And I think one and again, kind of going back on those I think those stakeholders are extremely important. And at all levels. I mean, you have to have administration bought in if you want the money to be able to do it. You need the faculty really bought in if you want people to teach it, and you need those students bought in if you want to make it successful, because without students, you don't have a program. And I think honestly,
and you also need the ones that are hiring them,
mm,
you know,
yes.
and then they can be like, thank you so much for, training my workers basically.
Well, because they can also send more workers to you, right? It's like, oh, look at what these people can do. Now let's send another cohort over there and let's y'all go through it. Anytime someone is hired, they're going to go through your program. And so, yes, having that, I think that connection with the people, that the companies around you, I think is incredibly important. Um, but I also think that helping people feel successful, if that's as an instructor, I'm helping my students be successful, or even a student. A lot of times doing kind of those, like we were talking about, those micro credential, those smaller pieces, maybe it's that they get a certificate, they go through your program, they get a certificate, and they're able to then utilize that at work and then being able to, um, you know, then come back and see the benefit of finishing a degree or something like that. So I think that um, making sure that you you allow students to be successful as they go. So as
Mhm.
they're finishing a competency, they should feel successful too, because we talked about, we want the learning process to be the most important thing. And so there's not someone that's going to come in there and shouldn't just, well, and okay, I'm done. I'm not good at school, right? No, 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 no. Let's figure out what it is that you're not getting. So that way we can make that skill, we can build that skill up and then continue. And so I think that it's really important for the institution to know we're not just going to put one course together and that's it. And that's our CBE. It's really thinking, kind of like you said at the very, very beginning, what is your goal? What is that program or that pathway or whatever it is that you want to develop for students to go through to create a smaller credential or an actual degree? So, um,
And I think I just want to say, small wins often, right? That's like a design
yeah,
principle. It's like give the learner small wins where, you know, people love to think that they know something. And so give that to them, give them that small win, right? I mean, obviously not every single moment, but definitely, right? Give them to them early because there's a lot of people that, come into these programs and they come in because the traditional education wasn't working, right? And they don't have a lot of confidence. And so a lot of times you need to start building that up. And one way to build up confidence is those small wins
yeah,
sooner rather than later, not at
right,
midterm, not the final talking much earlier, right?
yeah.
Week 1.
And that's why it's so important to have those formatives, right?
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of people that, may put pre-assessments together. And what if a student fails a pre-assessment? How are you going to get them back in? How are you going to get them to say, it's okay, because we're going to guide you through what it is that you didn't know from that pre-assessment. That's what the journey is. That's where we're getting you to. And so I think that becomes real exciting for students to be able to say, okay, well, I didn't know that, but look, oh, look, I just took this formative and I now know this piece that I didn't know before and being able to do that. Definitely.
And it also points out to the student, that as whoever's offering the program understands the whole. And so they might not even realize that they needed to know that. But that's the point of having an organization versus just learning on your own, like having, someone help you see, okay, these are the holes that you might not have, let's fill them in and move forward. Um, or
Yeah.
they could just,
Which I really love and the idea of that, because I think it allows students to critically think about what are the steps that's going to maybe get me to something that I don't know. And once they're done with their program, they're still going to have to learn. They're still going to have to be able to do that. And so being able to see that presented to them in a way that makes sense, because it breaks it down, it really helps them understand what are those different parts that you need to understand to get to this whole. So I really, really like that idea, is that is so important to be able to have that information for the students from the beginning.
yeah, CBE is very transparent.
Yes, which I
You
love.
know, Yeah, there's no like Wizard of Oz. It's like, this is what you need to know. This is how you're going to learn it, right? This is how you're demonstrating. It's all laid out for the student to then see, as
Instead of
opposed to,
what's that behind the curtain, right?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I turned in my paper. I have no idea how I'm going to do. That does not happen in CBE, right? They've been scaffolded up to turn in that paper, right? And they know exactly because of the rubrics, exactly, they should be able to score it themselves. Um,
definitely.
which is cool.
Well, thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us on this conversation, and really thinking about what are the challenges and the strategies that people can take as they're building out CBE. Really hope to see all of you again at future webinars, but also reach out to us. We would absolutely love to talk to you more about how this can happen at your institution or company. So thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. Always lovely to see you.